Hello, madam. My name is Yeti Poinle. Today, I'll be presenting the topic of protectionism, a strategy used by many countries to defend their domestic industry from foreign competition. For the introduction, despite the well-known benefits of free trade, such as great efficiency, consumer choice, global market integration, protectionist policies are still widely practiced. So these policies include like tariff, quota subsidies, and aim at promoting local economic stability and reducing dependency on international markets. While others criticize or for distorting free market forces, many governments justify these innovations as necessary for political, economic, and social goals. So let's explore the five key arguments protectionist policy with real-world example to understand their effectiveness. The first one is protecting infant industry. Second one called safeguarding national security, preserving jobs and reducing unemployment. The fourth one correcting trade deficits and lastly, protecting strategy or declining industry. The first argument is about protecting infant industries, and these are young emerging industries that lack the resource, technology, or economic of skill to compete globally. Government often impose tariff or offer subsidies to give these sector time to grow and become competitive. So, for the example, in 1960 to 1980, South Korea protected its automotive and electronics sector through high tariff and import control. Companies like Hyundai, Samsung received state support and later become global gains. This is seen as a successful case where temporary protection helped build competitive industry. On the other hand, Brazil in the 1990s also used high import tax to protect its car industry. While this did boost protection intentionally, local farm became complacent, failing to innovate or maintain quality. So when the foreign competition returned, they struggled to survive. So this showed that protection must be combined with innovation for long-term success. The second argument is about safeguarding national security. Certain goods like food, energy, and military technology are considered essential for nation survival during crisis. Governments may limit imports and support domestic protection in these critical areas. For instance, in 2022, the United States passes the CHIP Act to reduce its reliance on Asia for semiconductor production. This act provided funding and subsidies to bring chip manufacturing back to the US, with the new plants all being built in Arizona and Ohio. Though true long-term results are pending, early signs are promising. Another case is Russia, which banned agriculture import from the US and Europe in 2014 after the Crimea conflict. They increased local food production and became one of the top grain producer. However, this came at the cost of higher prices and limited choice for consumer. This highlight the trade-off between national security and consumer welfare. And the third argument is about the preserving jobs and reducing unemployment.
The third argument that we will be looking today is preserving jobs and reducing employment. So, next we'll move to argument three, which is, as mentioned as above, preserving jobs and reducing unemployment, which is one of the most commonly cited reason for adopting protectionist policies. The idea here is that foreign competition can undercut local firms by offering cheaper goods, often due to lower labor or production costs abroad. As a result, domestic firms may struggle to compete with which can lead to a layoff, plant closure, and raising unemployment. Government use protectionist tools like tariffs, quotas, and subsidies to shield local industry and maintain employment and economic stability. So, a good example is the US steel tariff introduced in 2018. The US government imposed a 25% tariff on imported steels and 10% tariff on aluminium, primarily targeting low cost imports from China. The goal was to protect domestic steel manufacture from being driven out of business. As a result, jobs were preserved in US steel mills. In US steel mills, several steel operations were revived and local industry regained some strength. However, critics pointed out that this also led to a higher cost of downstream industries like automotive and constructions, while jobs were saved in one sector, and there were negative ripple effects in the others. So the second example that we can look today is India's handloom sector. The Indian government took steps to protect rural handloom workers from being displaced by cheap synthetic textiles, particularly from China. Their approach included restricting low cost imports and providing subsidies and marketing supports to local weavers. This preserved millions of rural jobs, especially in economically vulnerable communities, and supported traditional crafts and cultural heritage. It also helped in boost the national pride and contributed to the growth and sustainable local industries. So now let's move to the fourth argument. So, as we can see, as the fourth argument is correcting trade deficits. Trade deficits occur when a country imports and exceeds its export. This imbalance can lead to a net outflow of domestic currency to foreign countries, which poses several risks. It can devalue the national currency, increase foreign debt, cause economic instability, and lead to over reliance on foreign goods, especially in critical sectors. To manage this risk, countries often adopt protectionist policies in critical to boost local production and reduce the imports. So there are two examples that can be seen. Is firstly is Made in China 2025, which is one of the most prominent examples in China. China made 2025 strategy launched in 2015. This policy aimed to reduce reliance on foreign technology by targeting tech-savvy sectors like robotic, aerospace, and green energy. The government provided heavy investment subsidies. And policy support to shift China from being a low cost manufacturer to a global tech leader. So, as a result, China upgraded its manufacturing base, boosted the export in advanced sectors, and strengthened the self reliance. And not only improved the trade balance but also positioned China's firm to compete globally and challenging Western dominance in several industries. So, as the second case is in Brazil, Brazil's import substitution in industrialization, which also known as the ISI policy, which took mainly from the 1960s to the 1980s. The strategy focused on reducing imports by developing domestic industries, especially in sectors like automobiles, electronics, and steel. Brazil applied high tariff and offered subsidies to local producers. Initially, this led to reduced reliance in imports, a more balanced trade position, and growth in local employment and manufacturing.
Now let's look at the fifth and final argument for protectionism, which is about protecting strategic or declining industries. This argument is interesting because it includes two different types of industries. First, we have strategic industries like defense, energy, and heavy manufacturing, which are important for national security. Even if they aren't always profitable, they are considered too important to lose. Second, we have declining industries. These are industries that are no longer competitive globally but still provide jobs to thousands of people in specific regions. Government often protect these industries to prevent economic and social instability. So the main question is, when does it make sense to protect industries that are struggling to compete? A good example of this is the US steel industry in 2018. This case shows both strategic and declining industry protection. The US steel industry has always been seen as a key part of the economy, especially because steel is needed for infrastructure, construction, and defense. However, it was struggling due to cheaper imports from countries like China and South Korea. In response, the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on imported steel using national security as the reason under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. This shows how the government used the idea of protecting a strategic industry to justify the policy. The goal was to revive US steel production, save American jobs, and reduce the country's dependence on foreign steel. At first, the policy seemed to help. Steel production increased slightly, and some jobs were saved, but it wasn't all positive. Industries that use steel, like car makers and construction companies, saw their costs go up. That made them less competitive, and the number of new jobs created overall was limited. So, according to a 2024 report by the Aspen Economic Strategy Group, the tariff actually hurt US manufacturers and didn't create many new jobs. In the end, while the policy helped in the short term, it didn't fix the deeper problem the US steel industry was facing. Next, now let's look at the European shipbuilding industry in 2002. This industry used to be a global leader, but it declined over the years due to strong competition from countries like South Korea and China. These competitors had lower labor costs and received heavy government support, which made it hard for European shipbuilders to keep up. For Europe, it wasn't just about money. Shipbuilding also provided important jobs, especially in coastal areas. Losing the industry would have had serious social effects. In response, the EU used a two-part strategy. First, they filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization against South Korea for unfair competition. Second, they allowed temporary state aid to help struggling European shipyards. The goal was to prevent the complete collapse of the industry, give European companies a fair chance, and protect jobs in countries like France and Germany. This approach, this this approach, they provide some short-term help, and a few shipyards were able to keep operating for a while longer. But in the long run, European shipbuilders couldn't compete globally. The industry kept shrinking, and Asian companies continued to lead the market. This example shows that protectionism can slow down decline, but it can't reverse it unless the industry becomes more competitive and innovative. So, uh, so what can we learn from these two examples? are these two examples. Protectionism can work when the industry is truly important for national security and when there's a solid plan to improve the industry's competitiveness. But both cases also show common problems. Often, protection ends up lasting much longer than planned. It can also make domestic companies lazy because they don't face competition. On top of that, the extra costs are usually passed on to other parts of the economy. Without innovation or better efficiency, protectionism doesn't solve the core issues. The US Steel example shows that protection might achieve its short-term goals, like saving jobs or boosting production. It can create new problems for the rest of the economy. The EU shipbuilding case shows that while protection can slow decline, it doesn't change the outcome unless the industry itself improves in a major way.
So for this next part, we'll be looking at the analysis if the measures were successful in achieving their objectives. So firstly is protecting the infant industries. First of infant industries, the challenge is a new sector often lacks in scale, capital, and technology to compete on a global level. Protection gives these industries time to grow, innovate, and eventually become competitive. Tools such as tariffs, quotas, subsidies were used alongside with the technology support. For example, South Korea protected its auto and electronic sectors, providing subsidized credit and export orientation policies. As a result, brands like Hyundai and Samsung became global giants, and Korean economy was transformed. However, the high tariffs sometimes led to short-term local production gains, but also cause complacency. In some countries, firm fail to innovate and collapse when trade barriers were removed. So the key lesson here is that protection must be temporary and tied to be clear performance target to truly succeed. So next we'll be looking at safeguarding the national security. Protectionism plays a crucial role in critical sectors like defense, energy, and technology, which can't rely on foreign suppliers in times of conflict or crisis. For instance, in response to dependency on Taiwan and China for semiconductors, billions were invested to support domestic chip production. The US built a new plant in Arizona, showing how strategic policies can help build a resilience after Crimea annexation. Russia banned Western agriculture imports and subsidize its own farming, increase food sufficiency, but there were trade-off. It also led to reduced variety and higher prices for consumers. So while the goal of securing national interests were achieved, it came at an economic cost. So economic cost. So next we will be looking at preserving jobs and reducing the unemployment. One of the main goals of protectionist policies is to preserve jobs and reduce the unemployment. Cheap imports often leads to factory closures and mass layoffs, especially in vulnerable industries. To encounter this, governments may impose trade barriers such as tariffs to protect local jobs. These moves are often politically driven, aimed at winning public support by defending local employment. So local employment and the US steel and aluminum tariff examples. For example, the US imposed a 25% tariff as mentioned above and a 10% tariff on aluminum to protect the American jobs. This led to a short-term boost in the US steel output and employment. However, industries can rely on these metals faced higher cost inputs, which resulted in mixed effects of overall job numbers. And In another case, some countries restricted synthetic textiles imports from China to support traditional industries. They offered subsidy and marketing support to rural weavers. This helped preserve traditional weaving jobs, reduce rural poverty, and promoted cultural heritage. And lastly, we'll be looking at uh, protecting strategic or declining the industry as the last point. So for this, we will be seeing on um, how governments often use protectionist policies to support strategic or declining industries. Sectors like steel and shipbuilding are considered vital for national security and economic stability. When these industries face collapse, state intervention is used to preserve jobs and maintain a critical infrastructure. So, the steel tariffs in 2018, national security justification. The United States imposed tariffs on steel imports, citing national security concerns. These measures were intended to prevent the collapse of domestic steel industries. They offered temporary relief and modest job gains, but a broader impact was mixed. Industries reliant on steel face higher production costs, limiting economic benefits. While tariffs showed slowed the decline, they did not lead to a strong revival of the steel industry. Many analysts noted that deeper structural reform and innovation and competitiveness were lacking. The relief was short-lived and did not reverse long-term industry trends. The European Union took a similar step to protect the shipbuilding industry. This included the financial bailouts, legal efforts to pressure on South Korea to reduce the support of its shipyards. While these moves preserve some European jobs, they did a little to restore global competitiveness. Asian countries, especially South Korea and China, continue to dominate global shipbuilding. Their advantage came from lower costs, larger scale, and stronger government support. This showed that protection alone is not enough. Without innovation and efficiency on the global competitiveness remains out of reach.
Now that we've gone through all five arguments of protectionism, what can we say overall? The truth is, protectionist policies have very mixed results. They can sometimes work in the short term, but their long term success depends a lot on how they're designed and what the broader economic situation is. We've seen examples of success. South Korea protected its car and electronic industries in the 1960s to 1980s, and that helped transform its economy. The US CHIPS Act is a recent example of protecting critical technology supply chains, and in India, protecting the handloom industry helps save jobs and cultural traditions. But we've also seen failures failures. Brazil's auto industry, which was heavily protected in the 1990s because uncompetitive and didn't innovate. The EU's support for shipbuilding only delayed its decline, and other protectionist efforts like import substitution often led to inefficient industries. What made the successful cases work was that the protection was temporary. South Korea, for example, opened its markets once its industries were ready. In contrast, long-term protection often creates a false sense of security. The best policies combine protection with investments in education, infrastructure, innovation, and expert development. They were also selective, protecting only industries with real growth potential. And importantly, they had a clear exit strategy so the industry had a reason to improve. That's all from me.